Production funding is provided by A. Reddix and Associates, Health Information Resource Center, offering short-term training for long-term professional careers in medical coding. HIRCVA.net.
Discussing the issues and celebrating the successes of the African American community. This is Another View.
Hi everybody, I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Welcome to Another View. Earlier this week, WHRO debuted a new documentary called Code Switching, where we focused on African American Vernacular English and how the ability or inability to code switch can have an effect on upward mobility in this country. Now, we began this conversation on Hearsay, heard on our sister radio station, 89.5 WHRV-FM. Then Kathy Lewis held a riveting roundtable discussion about the issue on her television program, What Matters. And tonight we continue the conversation, but with a bit of a different twist as we examine the African American cultural implications of code switching. Joining me tonight is our very own Lisa Godley, producer of Code Switching, Dr. Rebecca Wheeler, Professor of English Language and Literacy at Christopher Newport University, Nicole Cleveland, a concerned parent, and Dr. Janet Bing, Professor of Linguistics at Old Dominion University. Welcome everyone to Another View. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Now, Lisa, tell our audience, for those who may not have seen Code Switching on Monday night, how we got into producing this show.
Well, it came to us from a big fan of WHRO's, brought the idea to us, told us about his involvement with someone, a younger person who he had a good conversation with when they were speaking another language, but when it came to English, he couldn't understand what she was saying. So he wanted to know where things were, and we started the research. And once we started the research, we found that there were a lot of young people out there that weren't code switching, that were speaking informally all the time, and that it was impacting their upward mobility.
Yeah. But Janet, code switching, just to make it clear, this is not an African American problem, if you will, or issue, but that code switching can happen between languages, that almost anyone can code switch. Can you give us more of a definition of what it means?
Sure. Code switching is to change your language style to fit the time, place, audience, and communicative purpose. We all code switch during the day. As a person from the South, when I went to graduate school in Chicago, I code switched from Southern English to Northern English. People from Appalachia can code switch to Ohio English. We all code switch across the country, and you may code switch from one language to another as you're learning. And
I think I called you Janet. I meant to say Rebecca. I apologize. And that was not code switching. That was me messing up the names there. But Janet, let me ask you this. Why is it then that when we talk about AAVE, or African American Vernacular English, that there seems to take on an uproar that we don't hear necessarily when we talk about code switching between different languages, for example, or if other races code switch?
Well, I think you put your finger on it by the theme of this program, is that culture is encoded in language. And if I happen to speak formal English, there are certain values encoded in that. Not all students want to buy into that value system. And so when the teacher says, oh, that's not correct, that there's a value built into that, because what the student hears is, my language is incorrect. Or if the teacher says, you should speak standard English, there's an implication there. What I speak is not standard English. And so we have to be very careful how we choose our words.
Now, is AAVE an actual language? You're a linguist.
Absolutely.
And I know that this is a big deal for linguists.
If you've listened to Bridget Anderson talk, it's a legitimate language. It's a dialect like any other dialect. It's not as prestigious as some other dialects. If you speak a Boston dialect, for example, that's a very prestigious dialect. But there's certain things you can say in African American vernacular that you can't say in formal English. I mean, can you imagine Zora Neale Hurston or any of the wonderful African American writers trying to do it in standard English? They're just ideas that you can't express in certain dialects.
Nicole, you're a parent of 3.
Yes.
You grew up in this area?
I grew up in Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia, okay.
Yes.
Have you ever code switched?
Absolutely. I think we all code switch, and I code switch every single day. My children code switch. It's just a time and a place for everything. You need to know when to do it and when not to do it. It's okay to talk to your friends a certain way, but once you are in a professional setting and you need someone to understand what you're saying and you need to get a point across, you need to talk. You need to code switch. You need to talk regular English, standard English. So absolutely, I think we all code switch.
Lisa, what did you find overall in the documentary? I mean, what's the takeaway?
The takeaway was, I guess I would probably say about 95% of the folks thought that this was an important tool and that it was very important for the younger people who weren't code switching to know that if you don't do this, you're only going to hurt yourself.
Now, growing up, I mean, I learned to code switch. I would say all of us learned in our formative years how to do this. But there are some parents you found, I believe in the documentary, who said they were not going to teach their children how to code switch. As a matter of fact, we have a clip. Let's take a look at that right now.
Namely, why I don't want to teach them the same thing. I teach them to practice speaking the same way in every setting, at home, at school, at church. Just standard English, the way they're taught in school and at home, because I just want them to grow up speaking correct English and be articulate, be able to pronounce everything that they're trying to say with anybody, everybody, everywhere they go.
It's funny because I have 4 children, and I spend about $60,000 educating those children a year. And they hear me talking like that sometimes, and they correct me. But I think it's cute. I'm like, you ought to be correcting me because I'm paying enough for you to be correcting me even though you're in 4th grade. And so they're not getting the benefit of the double language because they have been isolated with their education. And so they don't have that, they're not going to have that great, I call it that great benefit, because there's nothing more relaxing and fun to be around your boys, your fraternity brothers or whatever, and just drop it all. And it's a cultural thing. You just feel like that you're able to just act black for a little while. And ain't nothing wrong with that. And there is a such thing as acting black.
That was attorney Mike Massey. Nicole, when you're raising your children,
yes,
did you consciously think about, is this as Mike says, a benefit to learn to code switch?
You know, I didn't know that it was code switching. I think as parents, a lot of us growing up, we were not taught that it's code switching. It's just a proper way to talk when you are in public, and it's a way to talk when you're at home. We need to understand each other. So I didn't look at it like I was teaching them how to code switch. It was, this is the way you talk when you're in the public. You know, I don't want to hear any of that slang talk and all that, you know, like you're with your friends. So that's what it was. I didn't teach them code switching.
We threw out a question to our Facebook fans out there, Another View Facebook fans, and we got a lot of feedback from those who saw the documentary on Monday. And by the way, you will get an opportunity to see it again if you missed it this coming Sunday, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we heard from a woman, Christine Jones, for example. She says she watched the show with her 16-year-old daughter, Charisma, and Charisma said that you're sometimes peer pressured into talking Ebonics, and students make fun of people who speak correct English. I see you nodding your head, Janet.
Yes, I think it's interesting. We talk about code switching, but where are the courses in learning to speak African American vernacular? If it's as valuable a language,
but okay,
why don't we teach the white kids to do that?
I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate with you with that, though, because I think part of, and Lisa, you should weigh in on this, part of the argument back in the late 90s when the whole idea of Ebonics came along, there was a huge uproar within the African American community saying, oh, no, you're not going to teach this in class. Now, in our research, we discovered that wasn't the point, but react first.
I was being facetious. I think that it's a matter of educational policy more than, I mean, we all recognize the fact that people have to learn the formal English. You can't, now we call it green English. You can't You can't get a job without it, and I don't think anybody here would ever dispute that. We all agree on that. But what we don't agree on is how we teach people. And if you were going to very subtly tell people that there's something wrong with the language of their heart, the language of their family, it's very damaging for kids. And I think the real issue, as Rebecca brought out in her book, is what's the most effective way to teach these kids and still give them the respect? Because they know what their culture is. They know what they can and can't say in each dialect.
The Virginian Pilot is going to be doing a story this coming Sunday, also on October the 3rd, about this issue. And when they did their interviews, Rebecca, one of the concerns of particularly older African American educators was that somehow we would teach AAVE in the classroom. Is that a misconception?
It's truly a misconception. If you think of it, for example, if you had a Russian come to the United States and they were put in an ESL program or a second language program, you wouldn't teach the Russian because they already speak Russian. At no point in the Oakland School Board resolution did they suggest teaching African American Vernacular English. That's because many of their students already knew AAVE. They were already fluent at it. And instead, the Oakland School Board, and what I have found also in my work, is that the most effective way to succeed in teaching standard English is to build on what the students know, to add new knowledge. So we build on the language knowledge of the home to add the language knowledge of the school, standard English. John Rickford, a professor at Stanford University, has said, if a child can say, in my dialect, we say it like this, that child will be much more successful in learning standard English.
Lisa, when you were doing the research and we were looking at the whole issue of ebonics, which was what it was called back in the 90s, a combination of ebony and phonics. Why do you think there was such a misconception about what Oakland said versus the way people perceived it?
Because of the resolution, and the school board adopted the resolution in 1996, and because of the resolution, the way it was worded, it was very poorly worded. And whoever was reporting it, the first reporters to look at the resolution, apparently read the first part of it, which said that we were going to teach African American students in their native language, and that's where it stopped. But what they missed was the next 10 words, which went on to say that they were going to teach them take them from their native language to teach them, use that sort of as a bridge to get them to standard English. And that's all educators ever try to do, is to take students from where they are to where they need to be.
Now, there are some students who say, you know what, I'm not going to code switch. As a matter of fact, we have a clip that we're going to go to now where a young lady questions, why should she even have to think about this? Let's take a look.
I feel like as a community, like as people in general, we all have something special about the way we speak, and who is anyone to look down on you for that?
Yo, cuz, come here.
What's good, son?
What they doing today? Is they trying to chill or what?
Nicole, when you see that?
I look at that and I say you have to be able to turn it on and you have to be able to turn it off. You do have to, in instance, when you are going for a job interview, when you are in a public setting, you need to be able to communicate with people in a way that they take you seriously, that they take what you're saying to heart. They don't want to look, you don't want someone to look at you as if you are a joke. It burns me up when I see young people, and I talk to them all the time, going out and they're talking like that. That's fine and that's okay if you two understand each other, but I don't understand you. The next person does not understand you. So can you break it down? For me, I remember growing up, I talked proper English, and I was always teased. I was always called a white girl because I talked white, as they would call me, and it would hurt my feelings. And I think a lot of children that are not that strong and they are smart and they talk that way, they talk proper English and are not as strong, they feel as though they don't want to talk that way because they want to be accepted.
You know, we heard from another Facebook fan, her name is Donna Davis, and she says, I've always been intrigued by the use of slang and why when it's used by African Americans, it's considered in a negative way, but when whites use it, they are cool.
Absolutely.
Reaction? She says absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure who I told this to, but just the other day I was at a stoplight and there was a young man next to me in the car, and he was a white young man, young, maybe in his early 20s, and he was blasting the rap music and he was doing certain things and saying certain things, and he was in the next car, and I was just sitting there. But when we do it, it's an issue, and I'm not sure why it is.
Becca?
In talking with my teacher education students at Christopher Newport, I tell them that as we see a language, so we see the people. And alternatively, as we see a people, so we see a language. And so if we disdain or think lowly of a people, we move those beliefs and feelings onto the language. And so Rosita Green talks about dialect prejudice. And so what we're seeing here is a prejudice against the language of perhaps urban youth or a particular group.
But code or AAVE is being used now in mainstream. You point out in the documentary about the music video.
Because of the internet, because of television, and especially music. Kids of from all races are listening to different types of music, and they're incorporating this into their speech.
Mm-hmm. The white kids want to learn. I mean, African American culture is cool, and the white kids admire it, but nobody criticizes them when they code switch and learn and say, "Hey, bro," and do a high five and things like that. But it's the African American children that we make adapt.
But do you think that's because there is an assumption that when you hear that white person speaking AAVE, that they're doing it amongst their peers, kind of in the street, but they would not be doing it in your classroom or in the job situation? I mean, the
assumption is they can code switch, right? But I think that a lot of people feel that if they give up one variety of language and learn another one, they're somehow going to lose that first variety that is so essential to their personality. I saw a case like that in the Peace Corps where a guy from West Virginia who had learned standard English could not learn Afghan Persian. 350 hours worth of classes, he didn't learn any. And it was his deep-seated fear that he had worked so hard to learn standard English. We finally,
that he would lose it.
That he would lose it if he just added another language, which is nonsense.
And she brings up a crucial point that in code switching, what we're looking at is not subtracting any language. We're not trying to replace the language of the home. We're trying to add another tool to the students and the young person's linguistic toolkit so that we can all have the different kinds of tools to fit the setting.
Nicole, what do your kids say about it?
Well, my children talk amongst each other the way they talk amongst each other, and they do code switch. They feel as though I was watching it with my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, and she was just like, well, we already do that. And not even knowing that they're doing it, they do it. Because I've raised them to, like my son is a prime example. He's 20 years old. I believe he's the best code switcher in the world because, because of how he is around his friends, but he knows how to turn it on and he knows how to turn it off when he is interviewing for a job or when he is out in public talking to certain individuals. So, but when he's around his friends, it's a totally different story. So they think it's fine to talk that way, but they know to turn it on and turn it off.
Now, Lisa, in the documentary, we also found, though, that there are people who, because each one of you have talked about homes and situations where there are examples of formal English, I will call it, that is spoken as well as informal English. But what if a child is in an environment where there's very little formal English spoken? How are they expected to learn how to turn it on and turn it off?
Well, that's where the problem is for that particular child. They rely heavily on their teachers to help them. If mom and dad don't speak standard English, but this child wants to move forward, they have to learn it, and they have to rely on somebody who can teach it to them. If they're having trouble, and Rebecca can probably say a little bit more about this, but if they're having trouble writing in standard English, then they're probably having trouble speaking it
also. Yeah. So, but would a teacher actually, you know, in one clip I remember in the doc, we said, you know, take away the red pen, yeah, but in other ways subtly make the change or the correction, if you will.
Absolutely. Correction does not work to teach standard English. In my own work with schools, I see writings from vernacular speaking students where the home language comes in all the way up into community college. And you know teachers have been correcting every single year, and so clearly it's not working. Instead, what we've got are techniques from second language acquisition called contrastive analysis and code switching. So what we do, my collaborator Rachel and I in the classroom, is we contrast the grammar of the home to the grammar of the school. We use the scientific method to discover grammar patterns. The kids discover the grammar pattern they're following. They discover the standard English pattern, and we use systematic translation and contrast techniques for them to then apply the new knowledge of standard English in their writing.
So you're taking what they already know.
Exactly, and we're adding
to it as opposed to teaching it, which
absolutely.
I think makes a big difference.
Well, there's a wonderful exercise in Rebecca's book about Mr. Fox, where you have the children role play. Mr. Fox speaks formal English.
This is from Flossie and the Fox.
Flossie and the Fox, and Flossie speaks African American, AVE, and in their exercises, they have them switch roles. And so they're saying, okay, now you're Mr. Fox, now you're Flossie, and it's a lovely exercise.
Yeah. Lisa, you also were at the Achievable Dream Academy in Newport News, and they speak something called...
They call it Speaking Green. Speaking Green. That's the language of business. The students will tell you that's the language of money. They said, if I want to make money, I have to learn to speak this way. And they do this from the 3rd grade up. So they're very familiar. By the time they reach the middle and high school level, if they're caught in the hallway speaking AAVE, a teacher or administrator raise an eyebrow and say, okay, let's speak green, and they immediately know to switch it up.
And Richard Coleman, who was a retired executive there, but he talked very specifically about raising the eyebrow or excuse me, but it was never a you're
that's wrong. Exactly. Yeah.
and that's a big deal for them.
That causes a problem. If someone were to tell you constantly that what you're saying is wrong, and this is what mom speaks, grandma speaks, you know, dad speaks, my uncle speaks, my sisters and brothers speak, why is it wrong what we're saying? And if you approach it that way, the kids are going to just close off. And that's what you don't want.
Deborah Brabson, who is also a Facebook fan, wrote, my daughter said to me, is that why you're always on me to speak properly? So I think she understood the whole idea of speaking green. There is an opportunity for you to watch Code Switching again this coming Sunday, October the 3rd. At 3 o'clock, we will replay Kathy's show, What Matters, and the discussion that they held there. At 3:30, you can watch this show again on the same topic. And then at 4 p.m., the documentary Code Switching will be on. And also, the Virginian Pilot will have an article on Sunday about code switching also. I think we have about a minute left, ladies. Any last-minute words you want to leave people with? Lisa?
Learn to code switch. If you don't know how to code switch, learn to code switch.
Okay. Rebecca?
Recognize that our children know language and are eager to learn.
Okay. Nicole?
You don't have to lose yourself, but you do know how to turn it on, and you need to know how to turn it off.
Okay. And
language and culture are so closely intertwined that you can't have one without the other.
That is fantastic. I'm so sorry we're out of time because we could go on and on to talk about this, but I hope everyone will watch, and I hope they will take it in the spirit in which it is delivered, because we found out that it was a very critical discussion that needs to happen in our community. Thank you so much for joining me today. And we'll be right back after this look at what's happening in Hampton Roads. And that's our show for this evening. We'd love to hear what you think about this show or any of our programs. Send us a note on our website, anotherview.tv, and check us out on Facebook and become a fan. Next week, a new initiative to bring green jobs to underserved neighborhoods. We'll see you next time for Another View.
Production funding is provided by A. Reddix and Associates, Health Information Resource Center, offering short-term training for long-term professional careers in medical coding. HIRCVA.net.